Tonight, we're going to be welcoming Raney Bench. She is the executive director of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. This lecture is based on an article that she wrote called Maine's Gone Mad in Chabaco magazine in 2014. A little bit of information about her background. She's passionate about the power of the past and how history impacts our daily lives. Raney has built a career in small museum work and loves to see people light up when they encounter an interesting or surprising object or artifact. She has worked in several small New England museums in education, exhibits, collections management, and as an executive director. She graduated with a BA in Native American Studies from Humboldt State University and a master's in museum studies from the University of Nebraska. We'll go for 30 to 45 minutes with the lecture. As usual, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box, and at the very end, we'll read those comments and ask those questions out loud for everyone to be able to hear and give Raney a chance to respond. So Raney, I'm going to make you host now so you can share screen.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Kari, and thank you all for being here this evening and for the invitation to come and speak. As Kari mentioned, this is based on an article I wrote in 2014 about the rise of the KKK in Maine, which is not something that I was aware of at the time when I was invited to write the article, and I found the history really fascinating. And recently, I would say over the last maybe 4 or 3 years, there's been a resurgence of interest in that article. And I've been invited to speak, or the article is being used in different school districts for curriculum and education resources. And we'll find out a little bit at the end, maybe why that is. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about the KKK in Maine. The article that I wrote was specific to Mount Desert Island, but based on this invitation, I've had a chance to do some research more in southern Maine and closer to the South Berwick community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader rise of the Klan and the phases of the Klan, and then I'm going to narrow that down to South Berwick and southern Maine, specifically towards the end of the talk. So hopefully that'll be a really interesting balance for you to be able to see how this might have affected your own community. And as Kari mentioned, I'm really passionate about history. I love it. And so for me, some of the most important aspects of history are are how to make history relevant. And so I'm going to sort of pause or start us off thinking about a few questions before I dig into the content of this talk, and then circle back at the very end to revisit some of those questions to think about the relevance of this story today in our lives and why it might matter, and kind of how it resonates with us. So that said, the rise and fall of the KKK is a really little known part of our state's history, primarily because it was really short-lived. It was only from about 1920 to 1930. But at its height, 23% of the state's population were members of the Klan. And so because it was such an influential portion of our state's history, it really deserves some study. So without advocating for any specific political perspective, I really want to encourage you, as I present the different phases of the Klan and what happened here in Maine, to think about the trends that you're going to hear in language, rhetoric, Americanism, and political speech. Much of the history that I'm going to present is going to sound familiar from today's news sources. And so I want you to think about how this makes you feel, how you want to process those feelings or deal with those feelings that this is going to bring up, what lessons we can learn from this history, and how we want to apply them. So before I get into the Maine KKK, as in the state, I'm going to talk a little bit about the KKK overall and do a history and overview of the organization nationally. The KKK started in 1865 and had members in almost every southern state by 1870. It became a vehicle for white Southern resistance to the Republican Party's Reconstruction-era policies that were specifically aimed at establishing political and economic equality for Black Americans. The members of the KKK waged an underground campaign of intimidation and violence directed at white and Black Republican leaders. Though Congress passed legislation designed to curb Klan terrorism, the organization saw its primary goal as being the reestablishment of white supremacy, and it fulfilled that goal through Democratic victories in state legislatures across the South in the 1870s. And then after that, we see a decline in Klan activity. The second phase of the Klan starts around the 1915s as white Protestant nativist groups revived the Klan. We see in this phase a much more public-facing Klan with cross burnings and stage rallies, parades, and marches that denounced immigrants, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, and organized labor. This phase of the Klan saw its membership expand far beyond the American South because issues relating to immigration and unionization and Americanism appealed to a much wider segment of the population. And then the third phase of the Klan takes place during the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. And during this phase of the Klan, we again see a surge of KKK activity, including bombings of Black schools and churches, violence against Black and white activists in the South. This phase of the Klan again goes back to its Southern roots, and it's mirrored in many of the tactics and goals that we see in the violence of the first phase of the Klan. So super quick overview, and I'm going to spend a few minutes digging into each one of these phases. In 1865, when the Klan first gets started, it's primarily begun by a group of former Confederate veterans from Tennessee who founded the first branch of the Ku Klux Klan. Their initial goal was to serve as a self-defense organization, protecting white citizens from the threats of independent and equal Black citizens. In 1866, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, and under its provisions, each state was required to approve the 14th Amendment, which granted equal protection of the Constitution to former enslaved people, and it also enacted universal male suffrage. The KKK organized efforts to prevent adoption of the 14th Amendment, especially in the South, and their efforts used violence and intimidation, promoted electing political candidates who would reject equal protection and suffrage at both the state and national level. There was real fear among Southern Democrats that Black voters would vote for Black leaders, or that white leaders or Black voters would vote for white leaders who were sympathetic to equality. Or in some situations, maybe white leaders who felt that they were beholden to Black voters to be able to win their elections. So from 1867 onward, Black participation in public life in the South became one of the most radical aspects of the Reconstruction era, as Black people won election in Southern state governments and even to the US Congress. For its part, the Ku Klux Klan dedicated itself to an underground campaign of violence against Republican leaders and voters, both Black and white, in an effort to reverse the policies of the Reconstruction era and restore white supremacy in the South. After 1870, the Republican state governments in the South turned to Congress for help, resulting in the passage of 3 enforcement acts that were used to strengthen the 14th Amendment. And the strongest of those acts was the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. The language of this act specifically made it illegal to deprive a person of their equal rights as secured by the Constitution, and detailed the kinds of actions the law would address, such as to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the workings of the government or elected officials. It gave the federal government authority to suppress insurrection and violence, and it stipulated that those committing these acts were financially liable to their victims, which was a first. Also, for the first time, the Ku Klux Klan Act designated certain crimes committed by individuals as federal offenses, elevating them from state offenses. And this included conspiracy to deprive citizens of the right to hold office, to serve on juries, to enjoy the equal protection of the law. The act authorized the president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus and arrest accused individuals without charge, and to send federal forces to suppress Klan violence. And this act was very successful. By 1872, the Klan's campaign of violence in the South was officially disbanded, but it's much more likely that the Klan actually went underground instead of disbanding. So we're going to spend most of our evening tonight talking about phase 2, which started in 1915 with white Protestant nativists that started to organize a revival of the Ku Klux Klan near Atlanta, Georgia in 1915. This phase of the Klan was inspired by a very romantic view of the Old South, as presented by Thomas Dixon's 1905 book, The Klansman, and then also by D.W. Griffith's 1915 film, Birth of a Nation. The second generation of the Klan was not only anti-Black, but it also took a stand against Roman Catholics, Jews, foreigners, and organized labor. It was fueled by growing hostility to the surge of immigration that America was experiencing in the early 20th century. This era of the Klan, especially in the Northeast, was less violent than its southern branches. And by the middle of the 1920s, the group boasted several million members. In the South, violence resurged as a means of intimidation, including hangings, floggings, mutilations, tarring and feathering, kidnappings, branding by acid, and new symbols of fear, like hooded figures and burning crosses. In the Northeast, the hate group promoted a more subdued persona. The Klan was not against anyone per se, only for the rights of white Protestants. So we're going to go into really great detail more about this idea when we look specifically at Maine. It's also during this era that the organization took as its symbol the burning cross. They held rallies, parades, and marches around the country. Because of its nationwide appeal, that was generated by a much longer list of ideas to suppress and people to hate than just African Americans, it really started to gain a foothold all throughout the entire country, not just in Maine. And at its peak in the 1920s, the Klan exceeded 4 million members nationwide, which estimates to about 26% of the US population were members of the KKK in the 1920s. The Great Depression in the 1930s depleted the Klan's membership ranks, and the organization temporarily disbanded in 1944. And the third phase of the Klan is in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. We again see this surge of Klan activity primarily across the South, which included bombings, beatings, and shootings of both Black and white activists. The actions were carried out in secret, but they were often known to be at the hands of local Klansmen. But in this era, America was changing, and faster and better access to national news, both on television and through daily newspapers, meant that Americans everywhere could see and hear for themselves the violence and the fear and the terror that were being caused by the Klan. They could learn more about the details of how these acts of violence were orchestrated, and they could see the impacts that it had on people and community. So watching this violence unfold triggered a sense of outrage across the nation, and it helped win support for the civil rights cause. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson delivered a speech publicly condemning the Klan and announcing the arrest of 4 Klansmen in connection with the murder of a white female civil rights worker in Alabama. The cases of Klan-related violence became more isolated in the decades to come, although fragmented groups became aligned with neo-Nazis and other right-wing extremist organizations from the 1970s onward. So the Klan would not have been able to make the inroads that it did as fast and as prevalent, especially here in Maine, if it didn't already have a foundation of hate and exclusionism from which to grow. So we're going to kind of go back a little bit in time to the formation of the Americanist Party, which was also known as the Know Nothing Party, which was founded in 1854. And it sought to stifle Catholics, immigrants, and other American minority groups by integrating nativist and Protestant values into local, regional, and national politics. The party had risen to national prominence by 1854, and for a time it was one of the leading political parties in America. It was also a secret society. The name is derived from the practice of replying, "I know nothing," if somebody was asked about the group. They focused on Irish and German Catholics, who they argued could not be loyal to the United States because they were controlled by the Pope in Rome. At the height of the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s, they included more than 100 elected congressmen, 8 governors, a controlling share of half a dozen state legislatures, and thousands of local politicians. Party members supported deportation of people they called, quote, foreign beggars and criminals. They supported a 21-year naturalization process for immigrants, mandatory reading of the King James Version of the Bible in school, and elimination of all Catholics from public office. They wanted to restore their vision of what America could look like with temperance, Protestantism, self-reliance, and American nationality and work ethic, which they wanted enshrined as the nation's highest values. The party focused all of their energy on immigration policy and public perception of immigration in an effort to minimize immigration overall. The Know Nothing Party were the first major political party to capture cultural values of nativism and channel that towards political goals and outcomes. They overcame concepts that might seem extreme to average Americans by linking nativism to common American values in a manner that audiences were convinced that nativism was consistent with American tradition. So they were manipulating the history of the founding of America to be able to promote anti-immigration policies and perceptions as being traditional as part of the American values. The Know Nothing Party centered their conspiracy theory around the danger and influences that immigration could bring along traditional lines, and by appealing to three basic concepts that were strong in the American mind at the time: secrecy, patriotism, and Protestantism. I'm sorry, I really struggle with that word. The use of the three basic American values enabled the party to construct a narrative consistent with the values of those who identified themselves as, quote, native or born in the United States. And they incorporated this into traditional American mythology as part of the country's foundation. We know that the Know Nothings had a strong presence in the state of Maine, particularly because of the relatively large presence of French Canadians who were predominantly Catholic. Because of the secrecy of the group, there probably are more political and public actions or elected officials that were tied to the Know Nothing Party here in the state, but we aren't aware of them because of the nature of the secrecy of the group. But we do know of at least 3 acts of violence in the state that were carried out by the Know Nothing Party. The first took place on October 14th in 1854 in the town of Ellsworth, where the Know Nothing Party tarred and feathered a Jesuit priest named John Baptist, and he rode him out of town on a rail, in part because he objected to Catholic students having to read from a Protestant Bible in school. He survived the attack. Baptist was a Jesuit who worked with the Wabanaki for a number of years in the 1840s before he began establishing temperance societies, converting large numbers of people to join the movement. And this attracted attention to his efforts here within the state of Maine. Oddly enough, despite the fact that the evils of alcohol consumption and temperance were basic philosophies that the Protestants also promoted, Baptist was still a marked man. Because who knew, if he had such influence over temperance, maybe he would also convert people to become Catholics, and that was a real risk. In Ellsworth, while he was here on a speaking tour of the state, he denounced the public schools for forcing Catholic children to use the Protestant Bible. As a result, the town passed a resolution threatening him bodily harm if he returned. He did briefly, which is when he was attacked, tarred, and feathered. There were also a number of riots along the coast of Maine, including one in Bath, where over 1,000 people gathered to block traffic and destroy a building that had been rented by a group of Catholics for a meeting hall. The Know Nothings in Bath burned the church used by Roman Catholics on July 6, 1854. A year later, a Catholic bishop tried to lay the cornerstone of a new church at the same location, and he was chased away and beaten. These 2 paintings are at the Patent Free Library, and they're John Hilling's pair of oil-on-campus paintings that documents the violent episode in Bath's history, the Know Nothing riot of July 6, 1854. These 2 artworks illustrate the different stages of the riot that led to the destruction of the South Meeting House, which had been rented to the local Catholic congregation. The painting on the right captures the vandalism in full force as men ravaged the building after a political rally. The fire was just beginning, and you can barely see it sort of on the bottom, like the 3rd window from the left, that's red in color. This is the beginning of the fire, as the rioters throw shutters out the windows and shout from the tower. The left painting shows the fire well advanced, consuming the building, while rioters are looking on and watching. The failure of the Know Nothing Party was that it didn't adjust its political messaging to respond to the demands of a changing rhetoric in American society. The fact was that not everybody agreed with their version of American history and their values. And there was strong political opposition to the Know Nothing platform, which also resonated with other Americans. The party was so wedded to their narrative of American history and the threat of immigration, they refused to acknowledge that there were other competing views. They further alienated themselves leading up to the Civil War because they missed the dramatic changes in American opinion while on the brink of war. The Know Nothing Party broke apart over the question of slavery, and ultimately they were pretty much not in existence by the 1860s. But their anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic sentiments had lasting value, and especially here in Maine, those values had lasting impact. As I said, the first era of the KKK sort of formally or publicly ended in 1872 and was primarily a Southern effort to violently repress the rights of Blacks that had been recently gained after the Civil War, but it didn't really extend very much into the Northeast. But the second era of the Klan did. This era was launched with the film Birth of a Nation, which played at theaters throughout the state. So if you recall, as we mentioned, the Klan was officially reestablished in Georgia in 1915, and it focused on the idea of Americanism, and it was concerned with rising immigration. The Klan and supporters were struggling to define what it meant to be an American, and as a result, who should be allowed to live in the United States. Birth of a Nation struck a chord with many Americans, not only because the film was the first of its kind to use musical scores, fade-ins and outs, and was the first epic drama ever produced, but also because it made clear who were the heroes and who were the villains. Directing America's anger and hate, influencing American culture, and giving rebirth to the Klan. If you adjust for inflation, the film is one of the highest grossing films ever made. So why did these films resonate so much with Americans? And why was immigration such a hot button issue when this film came out? According to the US Census Bureau, in 1850, that census was the first to collect data on nativity. So between 1850 and 1830, the foreign-born population has increased from 2.2 million to 14 million, and those were largely coming from Europe. So they moved first into cities and then beyond, and the immigrants were accused of taking labor and farming jobs. Most did not speak English. They brought their family, religious, and political values with them, and this felt threatening to some Americans. Many wealthy white Americans considered this trend a danger to the health and security of the country. Political parties and private organizations formed to combat the waves of immigration. So the first era of the Klan had very few of the rituals and symbols that we associate with the hate group today. Birth of a Nation glorified the American South and showcased the Klan as heroes, wearing those now iconic white hooded peaked hoods, and also Christian imagery, burning crosses, and fraternal rites that were common to secret societies and membership clubs. The imagery was important in unifying members of the Klan, and the secret rites and ceremonies solidified membership. It also created a sense of belonging and inclusion, which was something that immigration threatened. And so that also appealed to people. So why is this happening in Maine? National immigration trends were not seen in Maine to the same degree as they were in other places, but the state's small population made those that were coming here noticeable, and the demographics of the state were changing. In 1920, almost 4,000 immigrants arrived in Portland from a long list of European countries. They were fleeing war and dictators who were trying to control labor. French Canadians were also arriving in large numbers, seeking employment in the textile and lumber mills. Between 1840 and 1930, about 90,000 French Catholics left Quebec to settle in New England, and most of them were Catholic. As Catholic parishes were established in Maine, Irish and French Catholics built separate schools, separate churches. They hoped to maintain ties to cultural and linguistic traditions that defined their community identity. Additionally, tensions remained high from earlier temperance movements where Irish Catholics felt they were attacked on for the basis of their culture. All of this combined to create fertile ground in Maine for the growth of the Klan. Outside of the South, Maine had the largest Klan chapter in the country in the 1920s. Maine went from virtually no Klan members in 1920, and it grew to 23,000 by 1923. At its peak in 1925, there were 150,000 members, but just as quickly it crashed, decreasing by almost half in 1926, and further still to just 3,000 people in 1927, to only 200 people in 1930. But at its height, 23% of the state population were members of the Klan. So how did we get here? We all are familiar with the saying, people give to people, not to causes, and the case can be made that the Klan would not have been so successful in Maine if it were not for its leader, Eugene Farnsworth. He was born in Columbia Falls, Maine in 1868, but he moved to Massachusetts where he married and took an interest in the occult. He has a very strange career. He became a hypnotist and a performer, and he traveled all over the Northeast at local venues with his wife and a small troupe of actors. He had an unusual succession, including as an illusionist, in addition to being a hypnotist. And he had an act where he balanced boulders on the stomach of his assistant and then kind of either levitated them or did something with them. It was not super clear from the reports. But what is clear is he had an accident while performing this act in Rhode Island, and the boulders crushed his assistant. Farnsworth was tried for manslaughter, but he had some clever negotiations with the judge, and he was released, only ordering to pay the court fees. So then he returns to Massachusetts. He lets go of his career as a hypnotist and an illusionist and becomes a photographer. He opened a film studio, and both of those career choices also failed for him. In 1922, somehow he becomes the president of the newly formed Boston branch of the Loyal Coalition, a small group that opposed the formation of the Irish Republic, but more generally, it also opposed immigrants from foreign countries that might have loyalties for their foreign governments as they come into the United States. That same year, Farnsworth traveled to Maine in 1922 and gave a talk in Portland on Americanism, but he didn't mention the Klan specifically. He returned the following year and openly acknowledged his regional leadership. He began a zealous campaign to grow membership in Maine over the next several years. At a large gathering in Portland, just before the 1923 elections, Farnsworth was advertised as being, quote, the best loved and most hated man in Maine. His influence in Portland was at its peak in the 1923 elections, which resulted in a landslide of Klan-backed candidate wins within the city. Portland's mayor was not impressed, and after Farnsworth bragged about removing 2 Catholics and a Jewish person from the Portland school board, Mayor Curley is reported to say, quote, the cure for Farnsworth and his KKK is a stout boot and a pint of disinfectant. The activities of Farnsworth are setting neighbors against neighbors and stirring up conditions that may lead to riots and bloodshed and bring shame to the American name. Part of Farnsworth's success in Maine was that the Klan here avoided the public violence and intimidation that characterized the Klan elsewhere. Instead, the Maine Klan focused on fraternal rights, parades, and political campaigns. They also focused on what they were for rather than what they were against. And many of their values will sound familiar in American politics today. You can see here that they favor law enforcement, restricted immigration, organizational goodwill, allegiance to the flag, return to the Constitution, clean politics, better schools. So those are kinds of like sort of the PR and what they were promoting outwardly to support. So the other reason that they're focused their efforts here in Maine is that there were 2 important actions that took place politically in the state that drew the Klan's attention. The first in 1921 was an effort to provide state funding for private Catholic schools. And the second was a rejection by many Maine school boards of the requirement that the King James Bible be read every day in the classroom. Farnsworth began a statewide speaking campaign that drew huge crowds, 1,000 to 5,000 people, after which Klan membership was solicited for a $10 fee. He boasted that Klan membership was increasing by 1,000 people a week within the state. Farnsworth shared the stage with local Protestant ministers and focused his attacks on the growth of Catholic schools and Catholic and Jewish people serving on school boards. His strategy was to stand alongside respected and trusted leaders in each community where he was invited to speak. The tendency of small Maine towns to have strong social and civic clubs where fraternalism and civic organizations dominated the local society created a framework in which the Klan could grow especially strong. The Klan presented itself as a respectable social club, and it directed its messages to the little people, middle-class businessmen, housewives, ministers, doctors, and community leaders. Understanding the nature of Maine communities, the Klan began to focus its energy on winning elections and influencing politics to achieve their goals. Klan leadership was concerned that immigrants would gain control of local, state, and federal governments by electing representatives from their communities. This had been a successful strategy for the Klan in the first phase, electing Southern Democrats who would turn a blind eye, at the very least, and passed segregation laws at the very best. The second phase of the Klan was built on this same political strategy, and they focused on elections and elected officials. By the mid-1920s, Klan-backed candidates had been elected as mayors, legislators, and onto school boards within the state of Maine. The Klan had a very public profile in Maine, hosting the first ever in the nation daytime parade, which took place in Milo in 1923. Farnsworth was there, and he bragged that everyone in Milo was a member, including, quote, 600 citizens, town officials, and the sheriff. The Klan held a state convention later that year that attracted 15,000 people. The Klan opened headquarters in Portland, and they had offices throughout the state and a stronghold in the town of Brewer. So after looking really extensively at local newspapers in southern Maine, I wasn't able to find any reports of a public Klan meeting or parades taking place in South Berwick. But given the popularity of the group, it's really likely that there would be members of the community of South Berwick who were also members of the Klan. The Historical Society has at least one item in their collection from the Women's Klan group, but it's likely that there are probably other items still in family homes or private collections. So instead of being able to focus exclusively on South Berwick, I'm going to be able to talk a little bit about southern Maine, but I'm going to zero in on Sanford in particular because of its proximity to South Berwick. But it also ran really extensive coverage of the Klan in the local newspaper. And despite the fact that I didn't find any reference to the Klan in South Berwick itself, the Sanford Tribune covered news for the Berwicks and the different towns at the time. So this is probably the newspaper that people in your community would have been reading. So this is the kinds of things that they would have been exposed to. So hopefully that's relevant. So Farnsworth spoke frequently in Maine, all over the state, including in Sanford, where he promoted several local candidates and campaigned for state representatives and governor. In making his case against the current waves of immigrants, Farnsworth explained that the first immigrants to arrive in the United States easily assimilated into American culture and values, but that the character of the immigrants has been steadily lowered until recent years when the United States has become, quote, the dumping ground for the scum of Europe. Farnsworth reportedly spoke at length about two classes in America, Catholics and Protestants. He stated that the Catholic Church held a number of political prisoners, and he also expressed concern that there were increasing numbers of Catholic teachers in public schools, that they were working as policemen in cities and controlling the courts. Farnsworth acknowledged that the Klan was a militant organization with no political affiliations to a specific party. He made, quote, brief references to the Negro as another problem and briefly to the Jews as another race that cannot be assimilated, explaining that, again, quote, the Catholics, Jews, and Negroes are clannish and stick together, while the native-born Americans are constantly rowing with one another. In Portland, the Klan purchased land for their offices, including plans in South Portland to build a temple with seating for 7,000 people. Farnsworth also announced the formation of a women's order of the Klan because the interests of women in home life and education differed slightly from those of men. The Klan women were for Americanism and against professional politicians. They wanted to improve the public school system and dance hall conditions. Like, I don't really have any idea what that means or why dance halls were super important to the women of the Klan, but apparently that was a pressing issue. As the Maine Klan increased its focus on winning elections, there are several reports about local politicians in the Sanford Tribune. The Klan backed Sanford jeweler Alon Garnsey for a Republican candidate for Senate. The Sanford Tribune was one of the first in Maine to openly criticize the Klan and their anti-Catholic rhetoric, especially given the large populations of Catholics in the region. Of Garnsey's candidacy, the paper wrote, quote, he is not any use for Sanford's French-speaking people and is not a good representative for Sanford because he would not represent all citizens. The Klan's biggest success was in 1925 with the election of Governor Ralph Brewster, who never openly acknowledged that he was a member of the Klan, but he was endorsed publicly by the Klan. When a reporter asked the Republican State Committee about Brewster's position with the Klan, the committee replied, Brewster stands by the fiery cross. Debates about the role of the Klan in state elections were abundant. As the Sanford Tribune reported in August 1924, quote, go to any city or town in Maine and you will hear people discussing but one subject. Are the people in Maine going to give over the government to an oath-bound organization? It isn't necessary for Pat and Gall to wear a mask to support public schools, nor to love thy neighbor. Governor Brewster, or he wasn't governor at the time, but Ralph Brewster was competing for governor against William Pattengall, who was openly anti-Klan. Pattengall, ran and lost in 1922 and again in 1924. But he made Brewster's affiliation with the Klan the centerpiece of his campaign. And by calling such focused attention on the role of the Klan in Maine politics, Pattengall is credited with driving a wedge in the Republican Party over the issue of the Klan and whether Republican candidates supported the Klan in their policies against Catholic and Jewish participation in civic life. The divide resulted in an election upset when two Republican candidates ran for the party's ticket and the Klan backed one over the other. The result was that the election ended up going to an anti-Klan Democrat, Arthur Gould, in 1926. In August 1924, Sanford saw its first Klan parade. The Sanford Tribune reported, I'll quote at length, "At 6 p.m., men on horses led the parade, then the band from Portland, followed by 225 members of the Klan who marched wearing hoods and carrying flags, followed by men not wearing hoods and robes, and then a procession of automobiles with women and children Klan folk. The parade was followed by ceremonies at Goodall Park in the evening. There was much jeering and whooping on the part of the hundreds of spectators, but little trouble developed. The Klan burned crosses in the ballpark where a few spectators threw stones. The gathering went until midnight." In the same paper, there were two other reports that paint a slightly different picture of how the residents and spectators received this Klan parade and ceremony. The first is an article that says, quote, "Manager of Sears and Roebuck Shoe Factories, J.K. Williams in Springvale, wrote a letter to Dr. Cobb, president of the Goodall Textile Athletic Association, notifying him that because he allowed the Klan to gather at Goodall Park, the Sears Convincers would not continue to be members of the Sunset Club Baseball League. The Sears Convincers were one of the fastest and peppiest clubs in the league with a large following." The paper also included a long editorial criticizing leaders for allowing the Klan activities. So it's useful to quote this at length as well for a variety of reasons, but primarily because the Sanford Tribune was the first newspaper in the state to come out against the Klan openly. Quote, "Sanctioned by town government and protected by local Klan police, allowing the parade to take place is a distinct blot on the history of Sanford." The paper specifically calls out by name 3 selectmen with Klan affiliations, and then goes on to say, "We suggest if the Klan wants to rent a hall to indulge in tirades against Roman Catholics, people born of Hebrew or Black mothers, fine, it would do no harm, but they should not be allowed to use the flag for protection and strut the streets of a largely Roman Catholic town." The article points out that for years, Catholics and Protestants have lived and worked shoulder to shoulder in harmony and peace and goodwill. They go on to say, quote, "And now the Klan comes along with its 100% Americanism, intruding itself onto the calm and law-abiding life of the community, inciting a considerable number of its people dangerously near to the point where all love of country, all respect for law and order, all tradition for good and honest citizenship fades away and disappears into oblivion of racism born of lost faith in the doctrine of brotherly love and the golden rule. The parade is a slap in the face to the thousands of Roman Catholics who helped make this community prosperous and are among the highest taxpayers. And while the parade was in progress, the very atmosphere was tense. The air was charged with venom. There was a gun drawn by a police officer suspected to be a Klansman due to increasing tensions. And the paper describes the dangerous chaos as robed Klansmen rode their horses into the spectators on the sidewalk and sent people running into the alleys and into the streets. There's a third very short article in the same edition, which gives a little more detail about the Klan policeman who pulled a gun on the crowd because he was scared about the tension in the air between spectators and the Klansmen. As I mentioned, the Klan's biggest success in the state was in influencing state elections was with the win of Governor Brewster in 1925. Celebrations took place all over the state with cross burnings and other ceremonies and celebrations. So, of course, not everyone supported the growth of the Klan or the messages and tactics of the organization. In some cities, there was forceful opposition to Klan rallies. particularly by Catholics, including a march in 1924 in Fairfield, where French Canadians turned back the Klan with rocks and clubs. French Canadians also interrupted marches in Greenville and Biddeford. But back in Sanford, the Tribune was regularly publishing articles and editorials that were critical of the Klan, their political ambitions, and the alienation of Roman Catholics and Jewish community members. In 1926, the Klan began losing their hold on local elections, which was a trend that was also happening nationally. More open opposition and membership began to drop in accordance. There was more open opposition from elected officials, newspapers, and community leaders, which started to change the tide. The Tribune summarized this in an editorial published in 1926. Quote, "The Klan's goal is to replace thought with prejudice, which not only divides Catholics and Jews against Protestants, but American against American, creating the most dangerous of all divisions that can come upon a nation. The Sanford Tribune has been an outspoken critic of the Klan and Klan-influenced politics, which has resulted in the paper, its editors and writers being maligned, vilified, boycotted, threatened, lied to, and lied about. But the editors held their ground, and they were at the forefront of change." So in 1924, Eugene Farnsworth ends up quitting his leadership at the KKK in Maine, but his aggressive promotion of the Klan throughout the state was highly effective. There are various reasons that he gave for his departure. He and the Maine organization were accused of financial fraud and mismanagement of Klan finances, specifically related to the establishment of the women's auxiliary branches of the Klan. The Klan organization itself accused Farnsworth of treason for attempting to build an independent organization. Farnsworth denied this accusation, but when he announced that he was retiring, he said there was no malfeasance, fraud, or treason, but that his health was failing and he thought a younger man could carry out the work better. He left Maine soon after and attempted to rally Klan parades and meetings in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. In both states, he gathered very large crowds despite the efforts of local leaders to discourage attendance. But he clearly was of ill health. He died 2 years later of cancer. So several factors contributed to the fall of the Klan in Maine, starting in the mid-1920s. Farnsworth's removal from leadership was certainly one of them. But then, having purchased a large estate in Portland that was really expensive to maintain, the Klan experienced sort of constant money problems, as reflected with the accusations against the mismanagement that Farnsworth faced. They also, in 1924, their large auditorium in Portland burned to the ground, and they didn't have the money to rebuild it. And then in 1926, the Klan's last remaining property in Portland was sold to the city because they had not paid their taxes. There was a lot of negative publicity and increasing public outcry against the Klan's message, and that began to impact the ability of the organization to influence elections. In 1926, the Klan backed candidate Fulton Redmond for Senate, and when he lost that election, the Portland Press-Herald predicted that this would be the last election in which public officials were backed by the Klan. Violent activities were becoming more prevalent in the South at the same time, and this tarnished the Klan's reputation with Mainers. Money was the final element that ended the fast rise of the Klan in Maine. As the Depression hit, collecting $10 from new recruits became increasingly more difficult as people had less money to pay the fees. Mainers were losing trust in the Klan over tax issues and the use of membership funds. And as the reputation of both the Klan in Maine and nationwide became less and less savory, people became less inclined to support the organization. In 1926, the mayor of Augusta canceled a large Klan rally and parade by prohibiting marchers from wearing hoods or otherwise covering their faces. The National Klan also prohibited the wearing of hoods beginning in 1928, and that led to a decline in membership. Soon, the prominence of the Klan in Maine would become a memory, and its presence a surprising and little-known element of our past. So this brings us back to the questions that we started with. Why does this matter? And it matters because despite the fact that Maine has the lowest violent crime rate in the country, our hate crimes are actually relatively high, with hate crimes in 2022 at their second highest rate in history, and most of those being violent, and the most violence of those happening in 2020. So very recent. Hate crimes spiked in 2020, and it's continued to stay very high. The highest reported hate crimes target race, with the largest percentage of those being focused on Black Mainers. There was a study cited here released in 2023 by the Portland Press-Herald that reports that white nationalist groups are also on the rise in Maine. 24 white men marched down Congress Street in Portland in April 2023, dressed in the uniform of khaki pants, long sleeve shirts or jackets, black baseball hats, and ski masks pulled up over the nose. Along the way, they gave Nazi salutes and yelled racist and homophobic slurs at people. Quote, upon their arrival at City Hall, they unfurled a banner that read, "Defend white communities." This is just one of several examples in Maine recently. So though there are hate groups that are active in every state, Maine occupies a distinct place in the view of white nationalists. The state's demographics are shifting, but it remains among the whitest in the country. So what do they want? Some of them would like to rid the United States of anyone who doesn't look like them. Others know that it's an unattainable goal, so they'll settle for creating societies where they can exclude anyone who isn't white. Some simply want to intimidate or harm others in the name of expressing their beliefs of what that whites are being oppressed. Also, according to the Portland Press Herald study that I just referenced, all of the national non-governmental organizations that monitor white supremacist and extremist groups agree that activity by hate groups is on the rise and that New England is a hotbed for this activity. The Anti-Defamation League released a report in March showing that white supremacist activity increased in just 1 year by 50% in the state of Maine. Both law enforcement officials and white supremacists themselves believe the movement is gaining momentum. Police say it's hard to quantify because there's an increase in public displays of racism, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there are more racists. Those who are active in hate groups in Maine believe that their message is reaching and recruiting more people, especially single men in their 20s and 30s. White nationalism is not a monolith. Its proponents differ in tactics and styles, but one idea sits at its heart. Its adherents believe that white people are losing their power and culture to diversity, and that the only way to save the white race is by growing their ranks and creating a white society. Hate groups share some of the following characteristics, according to this report. They are seizing on broader grievances, including opposition to pandemic safety measures and to expanded rights for transgender people. As a means of recruitment, they largely rely on the internet, where sites like Grab and Telegram have helped hate to metastasize. White nationalists who are also active in Maine told the Portland Press Herald they don't want violence, but they said they think it's coming anyway. Todd Little-Sebold, professor at College of the Atlantic, who teaches the history of racism, said he's surprised how quickly it's become palatable to associate with hate groups. Quote, the stigma of being openly racist has certainly declined. Now people are shouting it from the rooftops. It's not unreasonable for rural Mainers to have a sense of grievance, a feeling that they've been left behind, that their livelihood and their jobs have disappeared. And the white nationalist movement will stoke that grievance, especially around politics of public support. They thrive in an environment where they can blame other people. So hate groups are revisiting old themes that are captured in theories like the Great Replacement Theory, a myth that small groups of elites, often characterized as Jews, are trying to replace white people with immigrants. Other themes include threats to jobs, personal safety, cultural and racial integrity, and religion or American values. So to return to those questions that we asked at the very beginning, does this history matter? How does it affect us individually, but also our society today? How does it make us feel? What do we do with these feelings? What lessons can we learn? And how do we apply them? And then before we sort of enter an opportunity for discussion and question and answers, I'll just let you know that, as I mentioned, the Mount Desert Island Historical Society published this article first in 2014 because of the rise of hate crimes that I was just citing. The article that I wrote initially has been gaining a lot of interest and momentum and has been republished many times. And I've been invited to update the information in the lecture as I was here tonight. But if you want to read the original article, it's on our website. You can access it for free, along with all of our publications. So you can go to the Mount Desert Island Historical Society and click on Chabaco, and then you'll see the full list of our publications. And this was published in 2014. So